You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
You're tuned in to NightVision Radio, exposing the truth one secret at a time. Prepare yourself as we explore the shadow worlds of suppressed history, secret knowledge, forbidden religion, and shine a light on the conspiracies to keep it all from us. Welcome to NightVision Radio. Well, the year was 1977, and it was a hot and sultry summer in Oklahoma, sort of much like it's been this week in California and in other states, as I'm hearing from my friends across the country. But that night, I was embarking on a big adventure, one of the biggest adventures of my life, as I left my hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, to head for Los Angeles, to parts unknown, to I didn't know what my future was going to hold, but I just knew that I wanted to be on the West Coast. So I headed out in my 10-year-old station wagon, and as I got out in the middle of nowhere that night, across the car radio came a news story that shook me to the core. They announced that there had been a triple homicide. 3 little Girl Scouts were found murdered at Girl Scout camp following the first night of their encampment there. Of course, I was horrified as I, drove along through the night, listening to them as they would repeat this story every time the news would come back on. And then when I got to California, I kept on top of the story through my family, my mother and my sister. In fact, my sister was the one who mainly kept me apprised of the details, and it just so happens that tonight is my big sister's birthday, and I know she's going to listen to this show, so I want to say happy birthday to her, and thank you for keeping me on top of the updates of this most notorious murder case in Oklahoma history as far as I'm concerned, and I think my 2 guests might agree. Tonight I have with me 2 OSBI agents. One is still with the OSBI. His name is Harvey Pratt. You might also recognize him through his artwork that you may have seen on the internet and on my Facebook page. I posted some of it. It's Native American artwork. He's Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux, I find out. Is with us, joining us tonight, and he was on the case that still sparks so much controversy in Oklahoma. You can't bring it up without somebody getting hot under the collar, either coming down on one side or the other. Also joining us tonight is Arthur Linville, who was the CSI investigator, I should say, not CIA. I don't want to put you in another agency, Arthur. CSI investigator, the crime scene investigator who arrived on the scene to examine all the evidence and to memorialize it for processing later. Now, Harvey and Arthur, thanks so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate you coming on board.
You bet.
And also, now we were supposed to, as you 2 guys know, we were supposed to have Mike Wilkerson with us. And Mike and his brother, Dick Wilkerson, and Dick and his brother Mike were also agents on the case. Dick was actually the chief investigator on that case, who sort of pulled together the team on the Girl Scout murder case. And he and his brother Mike, after the murders, wrote a book called Someone Cry for the Children about the murders. Now, that book is really rare now, and I tried to look it up, and I see in some places they're getting $300 for a copy of that book. But the good news is Dick told me today that they're going to republish the book. So I'm hoping that they do that sooner rather than later. They're going to add a few details and a little bit of follow-on about how the case winds up today. But you guys, if you'll just indulge me for a minute, I'll just share a little bit about how the case came about, and then when it comes to the part when the investigators arrived, I'm going to rely on you guys for all the details. But what had happened, this was the first night of Girl Scout camp, and the girls were all picked up in school buses in Tulsa and driven to Grand Lake and to an encampment, the Girl Scout camp called Camp Scott at the time. It was the first night of the encampment, and when they arrived, they were all allowed to choose their own tent mates. There were tents set up, and they were all on platforms, so they had floors or little foundations and tents on top. And all the girls chose their friends, who, of course, they would choose to be their tent mates. And when all the choosing up was done, there were 3 little girls that were left over. Those 3 girls, who did not know each other before this night, were going to be tent mates. They were placed in tent number 8, which there were only 8 tents in this particular encampment. It was called Kiowa Camp, after the Kiowa Indian tribe. And they were in tent number 8, which was the farthest out and the closest to the edge of the woods. The next morning, I guess during the night, there were some odd sounds heard. One of the counselors got up and she saw a dim light moving through the woods, but when she shined her flashlight on it, it would go out. And then she began to hear some strange guttural groans and grunts and strange animal-like sounds through the night that she kept trying to identify. She couldn't until she said they just became a part of her sleep. They went on and on and on. The next morning, I believe it was that same counselor who got up, and out on the trail, which was called Cookie Trail, there was a sleeping bag laying out in the middle of the trail. And so, of course, she's thinking, what are these girls up to? Somebody left their sleeping bag out here on the road. But when on closer inspection, she realized that the sleeping bag was not empty. At some point, they started rounding up the girls and discovered that there were 2 other girls that were not in the right places, or one of them, I guess, was in the tent. But there were 3 little dead girls who had been brutally sexually assaulted and murdered. And so began the biggest manhunt, I guess, in Oklahoma history. And the case opened, and the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, because of the complexity of the case, because of the high-profile nature of the case, and the heinous nature of the case, and the fact that it involved 3 little girls, the OSBI was called in. I also would like to acknowledge the families of the little girls tonight, because having lost a child myself 10 years ago, not to murder, thank God, but having lost a child, I realize that they miss those little girls still to this day, every single day. So I want to give extreme reverence to their feelings, those families, and also to the Cherokee community, because in Oklahoma, we're proud of our Native American heritage. As I was telling one of the guys earlier, that it seems like, everyone I knew growing up was either Indian, part Indian, married to an Indian, or claiming to be an Indian. So it's something that we hold dear in Oklahoma, not as dearly as we should, I might say, but certainly it's something that I have a great deal of respect for. So because this story contains Native American elements on both sides of the law, I want to say that, we want to maintain our respect for the tribal people. So we'll start from there. Now, Arthur, you got the call that morning right after the girls were found, I would imagine.
I'm not sure when they were found. They were found, as I understand it, they were found by people at the camp, obviously, but first law enforcement on the scene, I believe, was a highway patrol trooper, and then followed by possibly Pete Weaver and or deputy sheriff.
So Pete Weaver was the sheriff of Mays County. where that
Yes.
murder took place. That's right. Okay.
But I got the call that morning at 7:45 a.m. My notes reflect, and I happen to be a pilot, as was Dick, and we did not have an aircraft at that time. Later did, but not at that time. And so he announced to me that the 3 Girl Scouts had been murdered, and asked if I could get my hands on an airplane, which I could and did, and flew from Chickasha, where I lived, to what used to be an expressway air park strip, which is no longer in existence. And there I picked up crime scene technicians. And by the way, I'm not a crime scene technician. I was always an investigative agent, but mainly because I was a pilot, I flew Paul Esquinaldo and Larry Mullins to Pryor, where we were picked up, I believe, by OSBI Trooper Newton, as I recall, and driven to the crime scene. And what I did simply was to oversee the collection of the evidence at the crime scene. The bodies had already been removed.
I see. And Harvey, did you arrive that same morning?
No, I did not. I actually was involved in special projects and was not a resident agent or a field agent. I was involved in special operations, and so was not called in for about a week before they actually asked me to come in.
Well, I know that shortly after these murders, there was a cave located nearby where there's some evidence that was directly linked to the crime scene. Arthur, could you tell us what was found in the cave?
Well, there were squirrel hunters, and it was more. There were 2 caves involved in the case, and I think Harvey knows more about the other one than I do, but the one that he and I have discussed, it was more like a cellar area, and it was in a very remote location, and our understanding is that it was a childhood haunt, if you will, of Hart. But anyway, we accompanied, the squirrel hunters had found this, and we accompanied, I believe, still Trooper Newton, if I'm not mistaken, to the top of the cave. And as memory serves me, and again, I'm going to qualify it. I'll qualify it once, all this subject of my memory, and it's been a long, long time ago. But I know for sure we found a roll of masking tape, and it was, as I recall vividly, it was an odd width. It's not a standard 3/4 or 1-inch width. But anyway, later it was matched, the torn edge of that roll of masking tape at the cave site where Hart used to frequent as a kid. It matched microscopically to the torn edge of the masking tape used on the flashlight that was found at the crime scene, and the masking tape on the flashlight was holding a plastic cover, not unlike trash bag green, as remember, a little hole in it. We understand Hart was night blind. But so that tied, without doubt, the cave with the murder scene. Also, I found a newspaper that had been used by someone as tissue paper, toilet paper, if you will, in the field. And I ran across the date on that. I think it's April the 17th. It's a Tulsa newspaper, and that became relevant later, because the flashlight to which I just referred is one of these square batteries, and inside, and it had a loose connection, and someone had wadded up newspaper and put it in the back of it to force the battery to the contact to get a good contact. Well, long story short, we later determined, in fact, I remember reading this April the 17th date on this Tulsa newspaper, and so I remember speaking to someone at the home office once I got back to the command trailer, and I think it was Dick. It might have been someone else, but I asked them the date of the newspaper that they had removed and were processing for prints that was found inside the flashlight. and it was April the 17th. It's the exact same newspaper. Whether we so again, that too tied it to the scene. And Harvey, you may recall, may not, I believe we found a pair of glasses there. In fact, I'm reading some of my personal notes. I believe we found a pair of eyeglasses there as well. But definitely the newspaper with the and the masking tape roll. Go ahead. And
there was a photograph there.
Yes.
In the cave.
Well, there was, and there's where my memory fades. I don't recall whether the trooper or someone prior to me found that. I ended up with it because what I'm doing is flying back and forth. My notes reflect that I flew to Oklahoma City, picked up Mullins and Esclinaldo, and then flew to Pryor, and then went back to Oklahoma City, and I'm flying back and forth constantly with evidence. But whether I actually found the photographs, I don't recall.
Now, the photograph was a photograph of a wedding, and I know that you were trying to figure out who those people were because you were because the evidence in the cave linked directly to the crime scene, but you needed to know who the cave was linked to. And so what ended up happening was that picture was published in the Tulsa World newspaper, asking the public for assistance and saying, if anyone knows these people. And this is where I want to ask Harvey. So when you guys were out in the mobile unit, I know the guys at one point looked up and you had walked down to the water. Can you tell me about that story? Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Let me say that when they finally asked me to become involved in an investigation, they asked me to transport photographs of Gene Leroy Hart as a possible suspect, and so I was in my car and drove from Oklahoma City to Locust Grove area, and I remember thinking, I hope this is not an Indian who has killed these children. That was my first thoughts. I just didn't want it to be an Indian to be involved in killing these children. So we got there, and when I got there, I was stopped at the gate by Sid Wise, and Sid told me, because I was working undercover into some other investigations, and I was driving an unmarked car, and I didn't look like an OSBI agent like the other guys looked like. I had long hair, and Sid stopped me and told me that I wasn't allowed down there, and I just said, well, thank you, and I just drove on, and he chased me down into the camp, all the way to the camp. And when I got out of the car, the Wilkerson brothers were standing there, and they saw me get out of the car, and they started teasing me, and Sid jumped out and was chasing me, and so they had to cool him down and tell him that I was an OSBI agent, and I gave him the pictures. So that was my initial contact with the area, and I noticed that there was a lot of heavy growth there at the camp, and there were trails, but when night fell, it was extremely dark because there was no lights out there, and people don't realize, because they live in towns, that there's a lot of light pollution. But when you get out in the country like that, where there are hardly any lights at all, and all you see is the stars in the heaven, and you see the Milky Way and all the constellations, and people just don't see that anymore. And being extremely dark and not being able to even see in that thick wooded area off the trails, you couldn't hardly see anything. It was people just don't understand the circumstances of being out there at night. So you almost have to be familiar with where you are. If you are a stranger, you're lost.
Yes.
If you're a stranger, you have no idea where you're going. And by that time, we had several officers in there. They were doing searches of the area. We were looking for anything that we could find. Where they had, and Op could talk about the dogs and some of the things, but we were searching the areas, and they were cliffs, and that we had to climb up into the caves, into these cliffs, and to search the cliffs out, and they were full of these cliffs and rocks were full of buzzards, and you would crawl up these ledges, and there would be a half a dozen buzzards in there, and they would come out, and they were just nasty, and crawling through the rocks, and all of a sudden the buzzard would come out of the rocks, and there was a lot of things that people were not familiar with doing. So when I discovered that, and the focus was on Native American, and we started hearing stories from the local populace about Native American legends and Native American people and what they were doing, and that the officers were talking about comments that were made by the one of the suspects, Gene Leroy Hart. I became very nervous about being confronted by a Native American who was using Native American culture in a way, and I come from a very traditional family. My family is very traditional people, and that go way back. And I've always been involved and listened to stories of medicine and what people were capable of doing, and so I was concerned about my safety and the guys that I was working with. So that particular night, I went to one of the cedar trees out there, and I went around the cedar tree, and I picked a cedar from the four sides of the tree, and was going to go smoke myself off, so that I would be kind of cleanse myself and purify myself,
And when you say smoke yourself, a lot of people are familiar out here with the term smudging. In back, where we're from, the native people, call it smoking. I'm going to smoke myself. And so that's what you're referring to. I just want to make that clear to anybody who might not know that practice.
Well, yes, so you have to understand that there are 39 tribes in Oklahoma.
Yes, there
There
are.
are 39 tribes, and all these tribes have their own personal beliefs and their personal things that they do. And I come from the Plains tribes, and I'm Chiracahua and Sioux, and I'm a innate French and innate English. Actually, I'm a 16th French and a 16th Spanish. And
that's interesting.
And the rest of me, my mother is Sioux and Cheyenne. My father was Arapaho and Cheyenne, and so we have our own customs, as all of these tribes do. And so I was going to go build a little fire and smoke myself off, and I had some things that I normally carry with me for those reasons, trying to follow traditional ways, and especially when I'm involved with Native Americans, I try to focus on those things that will not only protect and guide me and make me a better person. And so that's what I was doing when some of my fellow agents caught me, and they said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to smoke myself." And I've been ridiculed in my lifetime from non-Indians about things that we do, and so I was very cautious, and I am very cautious about what I say about certain things and about traditional things, and because I don't want to be confronted and be ridiculed, and I refuse to be those things, because I've had those things happen to me my entire life. So, and right away, these guys confronted me, and they wanted to know, when they said, well, can we be part of this? Can you do these for us? So I smoked them up. I blessed them all, that we would have the clarity, and we would be honest, and we would be truthful about what we were going to do, and seek the truth. And that's what we did. And I also, by that time, I had received some medicine from a medicine man that my mother sent me to, and he had given me some medicine. He said, this will help you seek the truth, and it will find somebody to help you. And so I put that into the fire that night, a part of that medicine in the fire. And I said, this smoke will go up into the heavens, and it will touch somebody, and they will come to us. And that's when the photographs, 15 minutes later, the photographs were identified.
The phone rang at your mobile camp there, and it was either the guy or someone telling you that the photograph had been identified by a photographer who had taken those wedding photos. And it
Yes.
so happened that same photographer taught a class at McAllister State Prison, the big prison in Oklahoma, and one of the inmates had actually developed those photographs. And that inmate was identified as Gene Leroy Hart, who
Yes.
then became the suspect in this case. And Gene Hart at this time was, aside from being, a local football hero, was a convicted felon. He was in prison doing a couple 100 years or something for kidnapping, rape, and I don't know, but definitely kidnapping and rape. And because he had earlier kidnapped 2 teenage young pregnant women in Tulsa and taken them out to the woods, where he tried to bury them, tied them up, raped and sodomized them, and then left them there and was going to come back, and they managed somehow to escape. And he was convicted on that, sent to McAllister, where he was incarcerated for a time, and then he escaped. And that was his status at the time of these murders, was he was an escaped convict, and he was from that general area, grew up in that general area. He was Cherokee Indian, and his mother, a lady by the name of Ella Mae Buckskin, lived very near to Camp Scott.
Yes, they lived in the next section, probably less than a half a mile away.
That's right.
And René, to embellish a little bit or expand upon the photographs, I want to say something to the effect that there were hundreds of suspects. We had more child molesters with people with convictions of child molestation in that area within a 30-mile radius, I think, than I've ever seen. And I'm not disparaging the community. It's just that it was more prevalent than I would have dreamed at the time. My point being is that I'm not sure how it was given to me, but either Wilkerson or someone, I was assigned to the Hart lead, and that's just all it was. And back to what Harvey was referring to on the photographs and how you had characterized, René, the situation at the prison. He was an inmate, Hart was an inmate at Granite at the time.
Oh, Granite.
Yes, and when these photographs came into existence, again from the cave site, there was a photograph for the listening audience of a wedding reception. In retrospect, we found that to be the case. The ladies were dressed very well, and there's a girl sitting at a piano playing, and another one standing, apparently about to sing. And then there was a third photograph. And I believe at that time that woman bore a remarkable resemblance to a photograph that I also had of Hart's ex-wife. And
That's right.
And I interviewed her later extensively, and I was certainly not the one who had developed the lead at Granite. But when these photographs were released to the public, as you had correctly pointed out, we got a call from the participants of that wedding. In fact, maybe the bride, for all I know, or maybe the lady that was in the picture singing.
Oh, yeah.
And so what happened, and I do believe I interviewed her because we determined, and Harvey may have, I'm not sure, but we determined that there were that this family for these photographs that found at the crime scene or at the cave site connected to the crime scene with the paper and the tape, the newspaper and the tape, they had retained or hired their photographer for the wedding was a man who I remember it, was a full-time photographer and would shoot mug shots and this and that of the inmates as they were being processed into at Granite. Now, and he moonlighted as a wedding photographer. But they pointed out and were adamant the entire time, the family, that they had 2 copies of the photographs and the negative, and they had never disseminated copies of those photographs anywhere else. And as it turned out, through good investigative effort, and I wish I knew who to attribute this to. It was not me, but the Bureau. We learned that Hart was the photographer's assistant. He worked in the darkroom at Granite, which gave him ready access, obviously, to these negatives. So, because I don't doubt that the photographers sued them out there if they had a darkroom. And I've always believed that his reason for carrying these photographs, and again, when he was booked into jail, and I think a good close friend of his, it was common knowledge that he had these photographs in his billfold and would carry them constantly. And I am of the belief that he did so by virtue of the remarkable resemblance, what I believed at least to be the remarkable resemblance to one of the ladies in the photograph to his ex-wife.
Yes, I remember that. But this actually, the identification of that suspect actually came just moments after the smoking down by the water. And that was what was so amazing. Harvey, you sent the smoke out and said it's gonna fall on someone who's gonna help us. A few minutes later, the phone rings. You've got your ID, or the beginning of identifying the suspect. It's we're a little bit late, but we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a few minutes with more of the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders and all the mystery and magic that went with it. We'll be right back. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. I'm your host, René Barnett. If you're just tuning in, we are talking with agents from the OSBI, both current and former, who worked on the notorious Oklahoma Girl Scout murder case that occurred in June of 1977. It became, full of controversy and all kinds of unusual twists and turns. Part of it due to some of the Native American culture that was brought into the investigation or brought into the case by the suspect, and also later by the agents themselves. As we just heard from Harvey Pratt, he sort of was always living in a traditional Indian family, and so was used to practicing some of the what we'll call the ways or the old ways, and was found by some of the other agents to be smoking himself, as we call it, down by the water, and decided to send out that smoke to get some help in solving this case, identifying a suspect. They got an immediate response, were able to identify a suspect due to some information that they received immediately. And then the chase was on, but you were also, I imagine, checking out other suspects at the same time while you initially started your manhunt. for Gene Hart, which I think became like the biggest manhunt in Oklahoma history. Did you have other suspects during that time, or once you kind of drilled down on Gene Hart with that photograph and the physical evidence, was that pretty much your course of action, was to just search him out in order to investigate him?
I would say a resounding no to that. I mean, there's a transitional period between when someone is a suspect with a small s, if you will, and then the prime suspect. And when I said hundreds, Dick was always fond of saying that investigation is defined as the process of elimination. And you never, good investigative technique is never to focus on any one individual and try to build a case against that person, because with the resources applied, you can spend countless days or months and then all of a sudden eliminate him. So you do it in the reverse. We try to eliminate individuals as suspects by alibis, by fingerprints, later by DNA, which we did not have available to us at that time. But I'm looking at I've got about 2 or 3 inches thick of items that we had processed from the crime scene and submitted to the laboratory, and we're talking about hair, fiber, just every piece of trace evidence that you can imagine. And, we're taking trace evidence from all of the individuals at the camp and every suspect. PJ, Pat Wilkerson, and I, another brother, we flew to Colorado one time to interview a guy who was a suspect. And so, no, not by any means. I don't even know at what point we believed that Hart was the prime suspect, but certainly the Bureau agents, we felt strongly about it, as did the District Attorney's Office, with the evidence that we had ultimately accrued against him. That bear in mind that charges were filed against Gene Larry Hart when all of us knew he had had a vasectomy, yet we had spermatozoid in the girls. And we knew also that the doctor who performed that vasectomy was elderly, and I'm not saying that would necessarily go with a botched vasectomy, but there is such a thing as a botched vasectomy, and that's what we felt had happened, and it's what proved to be true. Because going back to probably adding to the evidence was his sexual appetite was such. Again, I interviewed his wife, and without going into the details, it was somewhat stunning how she would account his actions in that regard. But my point is, and Harvey, you may remember even more about this than I do, but we were stymied. I was visiting with Buddy Fallis, and we were stymied as to how we can collect legally sperm from Hart to compare with the sperm from the case. Mm-hmm. And you can't exactly do things that one might imagine that would, to say the least, shock the conscience of the court. And I remember we discussed a finger wave, but that, I was told by a medical person, would not produce sperm, only the fluid. And so I'm not being facetious when I say that the law books are full of cases which will allow, and the exact language I'm about to say, police officers can use trickery, subterfuge, and deceit.
Yep.
In cases. And I guess we applied that legal concept, if you will, because I don't know who came up with the idea. Maybe you remember, Harvey, but the idea was to provide him with fresh underwear. And the first time it came a big lightning and thunderstorm, the agents obtained all the sperm samples they could say grace over. And those proved to be the same deformity, the sperm deformity, as was in the girls.
That's right. There was some weird mutation about that sperm that made it easier to identify. And I believe that they were able to identify that at some point as being from a Native American and eliminating something like 99.9% of the Native American male population.
We may be speaking about the hair fiber there. Do you think that would be right, Harvey?
I think that is right. It was a hair.
Oh, okay. So it was the hair sample that they were able to eliminate like 99% of all Native American males, but Gene Hart.
I don't recall it that way. That would be, and again, you, based on what you've studied, you may be more knowledgeable at this time, at this late date, than myself. But the hair follicle examinations proved to be fairly unreliable. They were not. It was not where we could exclude any particular individual. As I remember it, the only thing the hair fiber said that it was from a Native American individual. And go ahead.
Yeah, if you did it on a national basis, it was pretty limited. But if you narrowed it down to that area, the possibility became slimmer.
Hmm.
Depending on the database is what you're saying.
Right.
If you just went to that area, then there would be more. But if you went nationally, then it would be less. But in that particular area, the hair.
And pursuant
that's the way
to
I understood it.
Yeah. Pursuant to what you said, Arthur, about, by no means was Gene Hart your only suspect. When I talked to Dick Wilkerson earlier, who, as we mentioned before, was the chief investigator on the case, or the lead investigator, he said that his words were, when he first heard Gene Hart's name, was, go clear this guy or hang him. Get rid of him one way or the other. Clear him if he's innocent, hang him if he's guilty. And with no preference either way. Just find out the truth of what it was. So it wasn't a case of, okay, we've got this guy, now let's pin it on somebody so we can close this case immediately. It was too important of a case to be done that way, and too much media scrutiny. I mean, this case made national news. It could have made world news for all I know, but I definitely know it made national news. At the time, it was highly controversial, and especially because of the three little girls and how heinous the crime was. Now, once you had sort of identified Gene Hart as a suspect, whether he was the only suspect or not, I know that in the book written by the two brothers, Mike and Dick Wilkerson, called Someone Cry for the Children, I remember reading a story, Harvey, about one time when, well, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. I know that it was at some point where, you went to go see a medicine man. And I'm trying to remember whether or not it was the medicine man who told you that Gene Hart was being helped by a very powerful medicine man, or did you go see the medicine man because you knew that Gene Hart was using medicine?
Well, I had, we had heard all of these rumors about the various things that were occurring, and that there was something kind of supernatural about what was going on.
Well, people said he was a shapeshifter.
Yes, yeah.
For one thing.
That was brought up, that he was a shapeshifter, and I visited with a very powerful Native American man that was involved in using those powers, and now let me say, that people have been blessed by God over the years to have certain abilities, and God gives you certain abilities, and if you use those abilities, they become stronger. Some people never recognize their abilities, and they never use them, and some of us do. And you go back into history, and there have been powerful people throughout history, throughout the Bible. Daniel in the lion's den. You had Moses, who had a lot of things happen, and manna from the sky, and all sorts of things, and they had powers, and they had gifts from God, and why would people be restricted from having those abilities because they were from another race? You know, you had people from all different races that had powers, and Indian people had those people that had special powers. And I asked this man, I said, do you think that this Gene Leroy Hart has the capabilities of shape-shifting? You know, can he do these things? Can he change and transform himself into animals and possess their abilities to get away? And he said, you know, Harvey said, there's nobody in this area that can do that. There's nobody down here that can do that. It takes a long time and a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice to be able to be capable of doing certain things. He said, it took me a long time to get to where I am. And he was an elderly man. He said, it takes a while to do those things. You have to really be blessed by God to have certain abilities. And he said, and I just don't think that this man who has been accused of all these things and been charged with all these abuses has taken the time and the sacrifice. Now, we got people that do religious ceremonies, and they go through a lot of ceremony and a lot of time to get to a certain point, to become an arrow keeper, to become a Sundance priest. It takes effort and a long time. And I wasn't sure, but I couldn't be sure. But I wanted to make sure that we were protected. And I had my brother with me. And I wanted to make sure that we had these protections, that in the event that we were out there in nature doing things, that we were going to be protected and not just walk out there and be at the mercy of somebody. So we did. I asked him to give me certain protections, to help me do these things. And when they give you those things, there are ceremonies, and there's things that you have to do and sacrifices that you have to make in order to have these powers, to have this strength. And so it's not just, you just don't give somebody something without a sacrifice and without having to go through something. We don't believe that the Creator, it's okay to pray, but if you make a sacrifice and do something to show that you're really serious about whatever you're asking the Creator or God to do to help you, then I think God looks down on you and says, you're making a bigger sacrifice rather than just praying and asking for something. You're giving something up. You're making an effort. So that's what we do. So I don't think that Gene Leroy Hart could do those things because I didn't think he had the stamina or the conviction to do them. But at that particular time, I was concerned about it. So I asked and got medicines to help us and to make us invisible. And we have people now, Native American people that are overseas in war, that got medicine from their people to make them invisible at certain times and to give them strength. And I've always used it. When I was in Vietnam, I had medicine to help me. That if I believe something's going to help me, and if I believe I have a certain power, do you not think that makes me a stronger person if I believed it?
Yes.
If I said I have the power to run faster, to hide, to be more powerful, if I have the power of the bear, or if the power of the leopard, or something, and I believe that makes me a stronger person, and that's the way it is. So we had these different things. So we had an invisible medicine that he gave us that we had to use a certain way, and that we could, if we used it properly and we had the proper sacrifice, that we were able to be invisible, and that's what I believed. We had medicine to track. He gave me tracking medicine. He said, if you get close to him, he said, you put this down, and he'll never get away from you. You'll be able to get him.
Didn't he give you medicine for your bullets?
Yes. He gave
to put on your bullets so that they would go to the right place only.
so that they would not go anywhere else but where they're supposed to go. They would not harm anybody else. They would be just for what you were supposed to do to protect yourself and others. And so, I still have that. I still have that in my possession. I still have
I know when I went to visit Mike Wilkerson in Tulsa back, 15, 20 years ago, he had his medicine bag that he got at the time, and he still carried it. He still had it. Now, yeah, I agree that, Gene Hart was probably not, didn't have those abilities, because isn't there also something that, wouldn't he, doing the heinous things that he was doing and, hurting people the way that he was, wouldn't that affect his abilities to use medicine? Like, can you use medicine for evil purposes?
Well, yeah, sure. Absolutely. You have witches, we've always been, you hear people throughout history, they talk about witches using things to deceive and to take advantage of people, to make them do things. And so you have that. And
But isn't there a price?
I had medicine. Pardon me?
Isn't there a price that you pay if you use a medicine man's power for evil purposes? Or that, it seems like I recall something about this story where they said, well,
said that. The Cherokee said that. They said that they did. They themselves, their medicine.
If you use the power for evil, you'll die.
It could come back on you.
Come back on you, right.
Yeah, see, so you have to be careful. If you use something to harm somebody, that it could come back on you. It could reverse it. This medicine man that I went to said that people would always send stuff to him, and he had a certain medicine and ceremony that he used that would reverse it and send it back to whoever sent it to him. So you have that.
Yeah.
You send it back. And
now I believe. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, he told me that he had a certain ceremony that he did to protect his property, and something came to harm him. That when it crossed his line, that it would die.
Wow.
So yeah, you do that. So we were my whole life, René. My whole life, I've listened to these stories from. My grandfather was born in 1870, and he told me all kinds of stories. My mother told me stories. She was an interpreter when she was a little girl for medicine men, and so I've heard these stories my entire life. So I grew up with it, as have many Indian people in Oklahoma have grown up with these stories and beliefs. And
yes, I heard a lot of those growing up. And, you're right. They're very, very interesting. And I have seen some things in the presence of a medicine man that I could not explain. And you will not change my mind that something supernatural, happened. I saw things.
They possess some kind of power. They possess some kind of power.
There is something. Now, we're going to take another quick break and then come back for the final half hour. My gosh, this is going so fast. When we come back, Harvey and Arthur, pardon me, I'm going to definitely get back to you, but I wanted you to tell us about the story when you went and got the medicine, and I believe you were wearing it around your neck, and you and your brother were out camping out during the course of this manhunt and what happened. So when we come back, if you don't mind, Harvey, I'm going to impose on you for that story, and we'll get to the final outcome of the case. We'll be right back. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. I'm your host, René Barnett. Tonight is a very special edition of the show. We're covering the infamous Oklahoma Girl Scout murders and all the strange aspects of that case, including the conclusion, which we'll get to in this final half hour. I want to remind everyone that this show will re-air on Wednesday, on the 29th of July next week at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you miss any of tonight's show, or if you want to review it, you can listen again. And we're going to immediately precede the show, Supernatural Girls with Patricia Baker. And Patricia has some special guests, and she's going to continue to talk about this case next Wednesday night. So if you're interested in this story, you may want to tune in next Wednesday night for a double header. This show will repeat, and then Supernatural Girls is going to cover the same subject matter. So it's going to be a good one. And we may have something down the line also from another one of the Inception radio shows that is involved in investigating this case. So my goodness, it just so happened that we all figured out that we had a common interest in this story. So please join us as we repeat this show on Wednesday. So Harvey, back to the medicine in you and your brother. I'm sorry, I don't know your brother's name.
Tony.
And you were out there in the woods, and you were camping out and just basically looking like two guys out on a camping trip. You were hoping to portray that image. Two Indian guys.
My brother was a Midwest. He was a police officer from the municipal government, and I had asked him to let him come with him because of being out and dealing with folklore of the Native American, and I wanted him to be with me, and so they let him. They transferred him to my agency, and we were together for about 2 weeks throughout that whole area in the woods and in some bars, and just trying to pick up anything we could, and we had several years earlier I had given him some medicine from the same medicine man, and I had told he had told me, he said, now there are certain things you have to do in order for this medicine to work, and he gave me certain guidelines and rules, and he said, and you can't let it touch the ground. I said, okay. So I had 3 pieces. I gave one to Tony, one to myself, and one to my Comanche brother, Jack. And I dropped one of them. And when I picked it up, I just mixed them all up, and I didn't know who got what. And so but my brother got it, and he wore it, and it disappeared. And so he said he didn't know what he said. I was out there. He said it just disappeared. He said, I don't know what happened to it. I was outside mowing the lawn, and so he told me he couldn't find it. So I went back to this man that gave it to us, and I told him what happened. He started laughing. He said, well, come back tomorrow and I'll have another one for you. He said, I told you not to let it touch the ground. And as one of the rules. And so we carried these things. It was protection. It was to help protect us from harm. And so we're out, and we had heard all these stories about an Indian who was doing all these things. He may possibly be the killer. So, and that he told lawmen that when they were looking for him, he was above him, and that he was below him. Now, I don't know what he means by that, but I just assumed that he could have assumed if he was a shape changer, he was assuming some other animal that we would see as just a nature.
Mm-hmm.
And, so we had been out, and we had gone out and bought some listening devices. They were vibratory devices that we strung along the trails, that if someone walked, then I had a receiver that would show vibration that someone was walking through the woods. And so we had strung these all out along the area. There was also a military group out there also that was laying out trying to capture somebody, and they were some special forces guys, and there was about 4 or 5 of them. And so they were down by the creek another way, and we were up this way, and Tony and I strung these devices out, and we had gone away, and we had been out for quite a while, and we built a very small fire, and we were sitting there, and someone asked me, he said, well, why did you build a fire? I said, well, it's not for the warmth, it was for the comfort of the fire. It was just fire. It was a comfort. And so we were there And out of nowhere, a cat landed in my lap, and just jumped out of the dark and landed in my lap, and it startled me. I grabbed it, threw it away, and we were just shocked. And right away, the first things we thought was that could this be somebody who had shape changed, and a shapeshifter, and then come to tease us and to torment us. And that's what my immediate thoughts were that. And it was that way the whole night. And in that morning, when dawn came, we got up and moved around. I'm going to tell you that it is so dark out there. It is so dark in those woods. And the canopy of the trees, you could barely see the stars. And you could walk somewhere, and you could walk right by somebody and not even know they were there. Wow. So that morning we went by to retrieve our listening devices, and we ran into those special forces guys, and we said we had a visit with them for 30 minutes or so, and then everybody stood up and went our way. But I never forgot about that. Jumping in my lap. And
just out of nowhere. What kind of a cat was it?
I think it was a feral cat. It was just it was a feral cat. It wasn't
like a bobcat, not like a bobcat or a mountain lion. It was like just a feral cat.
Just a domestic cat. Yeah, out in the middle of nowhere.
Very strange. Just jumped right in your lap.
Yes, jumped right in my lap.
That is really weird. Now, Arthur, I know that there was, as I said, it was like at the time and maybe to this day, was the biggest manhunt in Oklahoma history. There were all kinds of helicopters and planes brought in, and different agencies were involved. And then they brought in these special tracking dogs from Pennsylvania, I believe it was. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened with those dogs? That was another strange story.
Well, the dog handler was a charlatan. He was a fake. He should have been criminally prosecuted and may have been. I have since testified at two hearings regarding two separate murders, one in Phoenix, Arizona, the other in Florida, where people had been convicted based on this man's testimony. And he was held in total disrepute with any people, that dog handlers with legitimate bloodhounds and things like that, and he was a showman. I can't even recall the man's name. I've tried to put it out of my memory. But the ludicrousy of it was that when I recall one of the days that I arrived, again, I'm flying back and forth from Oklahoma City a lot, but with evidence. But when I arrived there, I never will forget it. It reminded me of the movie of North by Northwest, and I believe it might have been biplanes because they were crop dusters, and I'm trying to think of the plane. I should know that, but a Stearman. It may or may not have been, but they were treetop level or a little above, and they were spraying the entire camp with water. And I recall there were two of them, and making pass after pass. I learned later that this was at the request of the dog handler, who was wanting to push with this moisture the scent of the tracks of the perpetrator of these crimes down from the leaves and the trees back to the ground, where he could then follow them with his dogs. You just can't make it up. And then I witnessed him in the dog in the front of the canoe in a pond where this dog handler was saying he was sniffing the pond for the murder weapon or a murder weapon or any evidence that might have been thrown into the pond that was at the bottom of the pond. And I got crossways with him because I recall when we had the box full of all of the evidence, and we had gloves, and it included these newspapers coming back from the cave, where incontrovertibly was linked to the crime scene. My gosh, The leading edge of the tape at the scene of the crime scene matched the torn edge of the tape used to diffuse the light with the plastic. The newspaper was exactly the same edition. It's April the 17th. Same edition. It was a Sunday paper of the Tulsa paper. And then the photographs at the crime scene later, but even before then, there's no doubt on earth that any investigator would realize instantly that whoever perpetrated the crime scene was connected to caves, and vice versa. Now, the dog handler took his dogs up there and took one sniff of this and came back and readily announced that none of this evidence from the cave site was connected to the crime. And I got in hot water because I'm asking one of my supervisors, whether we're running an investigation of this dog handler or maybe even the dog. I didn't actually say that, but I drew a lot of heat for that. But it was just, it was comical, and it was a deterrent to the investigation, and I strongly believe that the outcome might have been different, but had it not been for them. But
Really?
And while we're talking about the evidence, I happen to have been in charge of the largest mass murder at its time in Oklahoma, a murder of 9 individuals, a family of 3, and then later 6 at a steakhouse. And if there had been a popular vote before the preliminary hearing of either that man, Roger Dale Stafford, or Jean Lee Hart, there's no doubt in my mind that the general election, a popular vote of guilt or innocence, would have exonerated Hart at the time, before a preliminary hearing, and found Roger Dale Stafford guilty. And you characterized it earlier, and I read a newspaper account as I was reviewing my case here, where he would incessantly be referred to as former Locust Grove football star.
Yes.
And I think Dick and Mike pointed out that when you have neighbors or someone you know real well, and you've seen them on the football field, and they're at the hamburger joint and all, you don't think of them as a mad dog killer or a rapist. You think of that he didn't match the prototype, if you will, of a Charlie Manson. But he didn't match the prototype either of the Roger Dale Stafford, because he was portrayed by the same news media as mad dog killer from Alabama. And I guess what I'm saying is the news media bias in this case, in my opinion, was just astounding. And it was somewhat of a precursor, in my opinion, to the O.J. Simpson case, because we had a minority defendant there, and the news media bias in his favor was astronomical. But the other evidence that I would be remiss if I didn't address is that of this abduction and rape of these 2 girls, and I'm going to hold off on reading any of these excerpts, except
Let
the
me
guy.
just, if you don't mind, let me just, because we've only got about 10 minutes left, let me just wrap something up real quick, and then
Okay.
I do want you to address that evidence and what you have there before we close out the show. What ended up happening was Gene Hart was eventually captured by the OSBI, and he was found in the Cookson Hills, deep in the woods, at the cabin of his so-called medicine man or elder named Sam Pigeon.
Yeah.
And so he was caught there, brought in. When he was caught, he was found to have been wearing women's glasses, and those glasses were also matched to the crime scene. They were stolen the night of the murders out of one of the tents, and he came out of the cabin wearing those glasses and was taken into custody in those glasses. Ultimately, he was tried, and although there was this evidence, which we're going to lay out for you again, that basically had him dead to rights, tied the cave directly to the crime scene, and the cave tied to the suspect, Gene Hart. However, a jury of 12 acquitted him. And some people were in shock, and other people were overjoyed because their, football hero had been exonerated. Now, of course, he had to return to prison because, as Arthur said, I think he was serving about 144 years for the brutal kidnapping and rape of 2 teenage pregnant girls in Tulsa. He was an escaped convict on these charges when these Girl Scout murders were committed. Same type of crime exactly. And anyhow, he was acquitted, sent back to prison, and just about a month later, he was jogging around the prison yard and inexplicably collapsed and died. An autopsy was performed, and they were unable to come up with any reason why his heart simply stopped. And I believe Gene Hart at the time, according to the autopsy, was a perfect physical specimen, and I believe he was about 27 years old. And
he was a physical individual.
Yes.
So
and
he was a massive looking man.
And so I go back to the medicine man's power, and maybe he misused it, and maybe he paid the ultimate price, even though he wasn't convicted. He ended up paying for those crimes anyway. But Arthur, before we close out, we have about 7 minutes to go. Could you just review some of the very strongest evidence on that the Bureau was able to collect?
Well, I will just kind of summarize it and add to what we've not yet discussed a lot. My memory is that, and again, I'm not saying that it might not have been an intervention, but my memory is that he had a heart failure and it had prior heart attacks. I think it's what the autopsy revealed. But there's no aphorism that I'm fond of that says it's immoral to suspect someone when you are sure of their guilt. And I've never minced words about my belief that he was guilty. There's a difference in legal guilt and moral guilt. And my reference to the other homicide is that I believe that the case against Hart was stronger than the case against Stafford. Stafford's been executed since, and we had a witness, his wife testified against him. But to summarize this, and let me back up. Well, let me summarize that. We got the cave is connected to the crime scene without doubt because of the tape and the leading edge matching the tape on the flashlight at the crime scene and the same type of plastic that was there. The newspaper being the same date, April the 17th, it was used as toilet paper at the cave site. That same portions of that newspaper was used to help the battery make contact. The photographs at the cave, which was a childhood favorite place where Hart would go, we know was developed by him. Those photographs, and we know through independent witnesses who testified at the trial that he would always carry them with him. My belief, once again, is the resemblance to his ex-wife. We have the mutated sperm in the girls. Hart's sperm was mutated, in part, I suppose, by virtue of the botched vasectomy. And then the prior crime that we've not addressed extensively, but to synopsize that, the 2 girls to whom you had referred were abducted. They were tied up. They were put in the trunk. And in reading, it would be comical if it wasn't so sad, but in reading this, he would talk about they didn't object, they went along with it. Well, he tied them, put duct tape on their face, and he tied them up with 1/4 inch, I don't know if it's nylon or cotton, I think nylon rope, and I photographed those, and the knots are the exact knots. It's the same size cord, the same size knots, and the same type of knots that the girls at the Girl Scouts were tied up with. And this man had...
In the same manner.
I beg your pardon?
In the same manner.
Yes, exactly, in the same manner. Thank you very much. Tied in the same manner with the same size. It's the same M.O., period. And so here he had abducted, tied up, and raped these two women, left them for dead because he left them tied up in a creek that had it rained, they could have drowned, or they could have suffocated. I think he gagged them. And so, again, the evidence, I just think, was overwhelming. Now, in fairness to the jury, and for many years I felt the jury had succumbed to the bias, and they were hometown local football star and all of that. But I really don't fault the judge at all. Did a masterful job, I think, or the jury, or Garvin Isaacs.
Who was the defense attorney?
Exactly, and he did a stellar job, I have to grudgingly say, because we were on the other side of it. But, you know, as a young man, a young OSBI agent, I viewed defense attorneys back then as the enemy, if you will. They're not. A defense attorney's job is to force the state to meet the burden of proof, and we have to give credit where credit is due, because Garvin Isaacs did a very good, if not masterful, job of doing that. And really, where the jury is concerned, we as agents were sure of Hart's guilt, but we were armed with the knowledge not available to the jury. We knew about the kidnapping, rape, and leaving for dead of these two women, tied up with the same cords, same manner, same M.O., exactly as the same knots used to tie up the Girl Scouts, but the judge disallowed that testimony because its prejudicial effect outweighed its probative value. And
but you know what? It seems like today you could say, you know, that they would allow it because it represents a similar MO.
Well, and we argued that the common scheme and design and the MO would be the same, but again, the judge ruled that it was that value. The judge recognized it had that value, but it did not outweigh the prejudicial effect, because, as you know, you can't introduce evidence of a prior crime to a jury at that stage. If it had been convicted and to enhance punishment, you can do that. But there's no way, had the judge done that, had the jury known about this prior act, exactly the same MO with the knots and the cord leaving them for dead, they may have convicted him, but there's no doubt in my mind it would have been reversed by the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, because based on judicial error. I don't think there's a way in the world that he could
have allowed it in.
Yeah. Exactly, and so you know, it's just one of these things. It was an anomaly, and you get into burden of proof. That's not a fixed thing you can paint green and define well. The burden of proof, I think, is like a snowflake. There's never been two juries apply it exactly in the same manner. Not one of 12 jurors would kind of have the same opinion, and if you put all 12 together, the burden of proof is very fluid. And I do believe that the jury placed an unreasonably high burden on the state of Oklahoma in this case. I would like to have asked the state asked for a change of venue prior to the trial.
You know, and I know that was impossible because law enforcement can't ask for the change of venue. Only the defendant can.
Well,
so that was never going to happen. But you know what? The music is rolling. I'm sorry we've run out of time. Thank you so much. Again, I want to acknowledge the three little girls, Denise Milner, Lori Farmer, and Michelle Guzega. God bless their hearts and their families who miss them to this day. I want to thank Mike and Dick Wilkerson for their help in putting this show together and for memorializing this amazing story in their book, Someone Cried for the Children, which is going to be re-released. Don't forget, replay 6 o'clock Eastern Time on Wednesday. Thanks, everybody, and good night.